Resource mobilization is one of the usual activities undertaken by social workers, particularly in India. Many of our people, particularly from the poor strata of the society, do face emergency situations as a result of natural calamities, including extreme climate like winter and rainy season, which brings in flood. Social workers do directly involve with the local community in the process of helping them to get themselves rehabilitated. Today, fundraising has become a professional activity across the globe. However, in India, this is a comparatively new concept which needs to be included in our curriculum. Association of Fundraising Professionals is an organization located in the United States which has about 30,000 professionals involved with them, along with around 229 chapters. We have with us Mr. Andrew Watt, who is the current president of AFP in the United States. Andrew serves on the board of directors of AFP and the AFP Foundation of Philanthropy of Canada. He was vice president of AFP's international development in 2006 and was promoted as a chief program officer in 2008. Earlier, he served the Institute of Fundraising in the United Kingdom from 1993 to 2006. He also served as a volunteer and board member in several non-governmental organizations. Currently, he is also the chairman of American Friends of Winchester College, as well as adjunct faculty at St. Mary's University in Minnesota, teaching global philanthropy. We know that in the School of Social Work, we have started an MSW program with a specialization in philanthropy. Perhaps this is the only program which is available not only in the country but across the globe on philanthropy social work. And we in the School of Social Work deem it fit to include a course on fundraising which will be of great help to the many social workers that we are training who would become social workers to work among the poorest of the poor. Now, to begin with, Mr. Andrews, could you kindly tell us about, in brief, about AFP, its history, and the kind of activities that the AFP is currently involved with? Mr. Andrews.
Fundraising has been a sort of baseline. Fundraising has been a baseline credential for Americans for many, many years. America is very strongly focused on the importance of community. Small grassroots organizations and large organizations all depend on the engagement with their audiences, with the engagement of people throughout the United States to make them succeed and grow. And over 50 years ago, AFP was established to help people raise funds to develop resources for those organizations and for those communities in a professional way. And not just in a professional way, but in an ethical way, in a way that members of the public could engage with, and in a way that members of the public could see that their trust was deserved. So AFP has been serving the public trust in the United States, Canada, and around the globe now for over 50 years. We have partnerships with sister associations in many different countries, and we have partnerships with government agencies and with universities that enable us to deliver the kind of resources that we're talking about here today. Education, access to other fundraisers, mentoring and networks, and through all of that, being able to achieve impact within the communities of the countries that we serve. Partners such as IGNU are absolutely critical in helping us achieve those objectives in an appropriate fashion.
See, when we talk about fundraising, and as it was really nice to know that a country like United States taking leadership in teaching people on fundraising, training professionals on fundraising, and our curiosity is to find out uh, the need for an affluent country like United States or United Kingdom or many of these Western countries which are quite advanced. What is the kind of a need for them to go for fundraising in comparison with the rest of the world, especially when we talk about the third world countries like India?
I think that wherever you go, and this is something that I've learned as I've grown older within the fundraising community, there is huge need. There's a need to develop a world in which we want our children and our grandchildren to live. And wherever you go, there is huge social need as well. If you go into one of the large cities of the developed world, you see extreme social deprivation. And the contrast between the lifestyles of the rich and the affluent and those of the people who are working in very low-paid jobs or no jobs at all is very extreme. I live in Washington, D.C., and the differences there, the extremes of experience, are extremely strongly marked. So it's interesting to me to see, and I've been working for fundraisers for over 20 years, the degree to which fundraisers in affluent countries such as Western Europe or in the United States are beginning to learn from the experience of fundraisers and resource development in the developing world. It's not a one-way flow of information and inspiration, it's a two-way flow. And what we frequently find is that where the need is greatest, so is the spirit of entrepreneurialism, so is the spirit of commitment, and those are things that we learn from massively in North America and around the developed world. So I think there's a very relevant cross-flow of experience here. I think each of us can learn from one another. But what the United States and the developed world, but particularly North America, has is a very long, structured and professional approach to fundraising. So if you're talking about resource development in the traditional sense, you don't have to look much further than North America to see how it has grown, how it's developed, and how it's succeeded. But what's becoming very clear is that we're all operating in an increasingly volatile environment. And that environment means that we have to be nimble, we have to be flexible, and we really have to respond to needs on a very, very diverse scale. And often you find that individuals and organizations are much better equipped to do that in countries such as India or in countries in the truly developing world than they are in North America.
Mr. Andrews, you already told us that AFP had been working for about 5 decades now. Given your experience across the globe, what do you see the present scope for fundraising, not only in the United States, but a country like India and other third world countries?
It's a really interesting question. I don't think any of us in our lives have experienced such a volatile environment as the one that we're facing now. And in facing that environment, we have to tear up the rule book. We have to look outside our boxes and understand what it is that we have to do in order to achieve impact. Because ultimately, fundraising is not about raising money. It's about developing resources with our constituents, with our supporters, and those are government, those are individuals, those are organizations and big corporations, in order to achieve impact on the ground. We have to be much clearer about what that impact is. If there ever was a social compact in any country, governments are busy tearing it up at the moment as we speak. They're tearing it up because they can no longer afford to honour the terms of the compact that they've entered into with us, the people, and with the community. And often you find that NGOs and community-based organisations are far better able to identify the things that need to be done and how to do them effectively than big governmental structures. And perhaps the best outcome is where the governmental structures and the NGO community come together to work as one in order to deliver impact on the ground. So sometimes we talk about fundraising, and traditionally that's what it has been. But I think that all of us now are looking much more broadly at resource development. We could be looking at interesting business models, we could be looking at social investment, and yes, there is room for the traditional fundraising approach within the mix. But the reality is that we're trying to achieve change, and we're trying to achieve impact. And where partnerships between organisations like the Association of Fundraising Professionals and IGNU have strength is that you see different facets of the community coming together to provide resources to help you do that.
Well, in our discussion, it's quite understandable that how one can go about raising funds in an affluent country like the United States or UK or other Western world. How practical is it for a third world country to involve in fundraising?
In certain areas, highly practical in the traditional sense. So if you look at the field of higher education or healthcare foundations, then the traditional forms of fundraising work extremely well. But also you have to go back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is about community engagement and community development. And in a country such as India, where there is a very, very highly developed sense of community engagement, where the approach of faith-based organizations and the various faiths that are represented within this country all extol the need for and the virtue of engagement in this way, I think that there is an enormous opportunity here. Now, the opportunity that comes out of a relationship such as ours is that we can take that overwhelming moral and ethical understanding and translate it into something more professional. And that is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Professionalism today has never been needed more, because as governments draw back from funding some of this work, or as governments struggle to be flexible and nimble enough to deliver programs, we really need to accept that we have to be professional and ethical ourselves. And so taking some of those professional structures, taking some of those ethical structures, and applying them and building them into the strengths of the approaches that you have here, could begin to develop a really, really powerful, even more powerful third sector than the one that currently exists.
Well, we are discussing about the importance of fundraising. Now, in your concept, fundraising, does it limit itself only to collecting money, or does it involve mobilization of other relief materials, other resources?
I think it goes back to that question of impact and what you need to achieve it. True fundraising is not raising money, it's about mobilizing resources. And anybody who works in that field has got to understand that there are many different ways in which you can approach this. There is no one way that fits perfectly every single environment. So a key component of the fundraising approach and the resource development approach is entrepreneurialism. It's about recognizing opportunities and how to maximize them. It's about understanding the power of partnerships and how you identify and structure an appropriate partnership. It's about understanding how you speak to people and engage them with a cause, and understanding about how you create an atmosphere of trust and understanding that keeps people working with you for many years and in some cases generations to come. So it's an extremely multi-tiered environment that a true fundraiser and resource developer works in. You have to have that ability to bring many different strands together to create impact.
Well, this idea of raising funds or mobilizing resources, do you see it as a one-time activity, or it is a kind of an activity which is a continuous process? You have established system and it becomes a kind of a everyday activity for an organization like AFP.
It's an evolutionary process. Entering into a relationship in this area is to enter into a relationship that could extend for many years and grow into many different environments. As we all know, circumstances change. As you achieve one objective, you have to move on to others. So for AFP and for any other organisation involved in this field, it's recognising that it's a constant evolutionary cycle that you're going into. You can't remain static. If you remain static, you die. Moving forward has never been more important than it is at the moment, and trying to achieve exponential change requires exponential flexibility from the part of the people who are working in it.
Well, if we plan for creating awareness among our potential stakeholders and motivating them to involve in this kind of an activity of resource mobilization as professionals? What could be the kind of a roadmap, given the kind of experience that you have with the AFP? You have an organization. Now, is it a registered organization? Is it an organization functioning at the national level? Or is it an organization functioning at the national level, having its own branches in various states? And how do you extend further beyond the borders of a particular country?
That's many, many questions rather than one, so I'll try to address some of them one by one. I think that one can't just approach it in a one-off fashion. You have to recognize that the need in different environments can vary enormously, and you have to approach it from the point of view that you provide resources that are tailored for different needs at different times in different places. No one organization is in a position to do that, and that's why we, like every other non-profit of which I'm aware, work in partnerships to leverage our resources against each other, and that's what you have to do within resource development as well. You cannot think within your own box. You have to understand the environment in which you operate and where the opportunities lie there. So for all of us working in the third sector, all of us working in a non-profit environment, we have to husband our resources, but we also have to recognize that in order to achieve change, we have to undertake some element of risk. Controlled risk is easiest to achieve when you're working with other respected organizations or partners who have similar objectives to yourself. And so you're constantly changing, modifying and adapting your approach to take into account the needs of your partners, but most importantly, the needs of the community that you serve. And when I spoke about the strength of community in the United States at the beginning of this conversation, I was looking at something that is, I think, extraordinarily strong even today within the US. Everybody from the age of 2 or 3 upwards is engaged with their school. They're engaged with their local community, with the faith-based organizations that they operate with, and they understand that it's their responsibility, not that of government, in order to effect change at the local level. And so you have this incredibly dynamic relationship, and that's what we all have to seek to achieve. I think that's what most of us have, but not all of us are prepared to accept. So for the resource development professional, the fundraiser, the key is trying to maximize the strength of those relationships in the community and to make them really work.
Well, we have said that AFP is having something like its membership is over 30,000 and it has got more than 229 chapters across the globe. What kind of professionals have membership in AFP? Are they permanent employees or the part-time employees? Are they volunteers? The nature of work that they are engaged with? And do you also have paid employees working in your organization?
AFP's membership spans an incredibly broad range of organizations. If you look at one side of the spectrum, you have the large institutional fundraising organizations, so healthcare, the arts, education. But if you look on the other side of the spectrum, we have an extraordinary number of very small, informal, grassroots and community-based organizations working within our structure. The strength of a chapter structure is it brings all these people together so that they can share their experience, so that they can share the learning they have from a very wide range of backgrounds. They mentor each other, they support each other, they exchange ideas and learning experiences, and that creates an incredibly rich and dynamic environment. What we also find is that while the majority of our membership sits in North America, our membership as a whole benefits enormously from the experience of fundraisers from outside North America, never more so than in the last 2 or 3 years. Because I said earlier that if you want to look for innovation, if you want to look for entrepreneurialism rather than sheer professionalism, you need to look outside the natural boundaries of North America and at the emerging markets. So some of the stories that you learn in environments such as Latin America or in India or in the Asia-Pacific region speak to that. They speak to it very strongly. You can see huge impact in very creative ways coming out of need, the need to address something rapidly and swiftly. Now, yes, AFP has that number of members, and therefore, yes, we have a paid staff. AFP is funded very largely through membership subscriptions. We also provide training, resources, but primarily our funding comes from membership subscriptions and the conferences that we hold. But increasingly we're moving away from that, because a lot of the work we do to build resources, build capacity, build community is something that is eminently fundable from the large foundations or from corporations around the world. And there's a great deal of interest in seeing how we do that, because AFP, like many organisations, recognises that its strength is only as strong as its partners on the ground. And so in any environment in which we find ourselves, we try to engage with the fundraising community and empower the resource development community within that environment through working with credible institutions and well-respected national institutions to deliver programs and deliver services. Fundamentally, what we are is a network. And the real strength of our network is the people who are part of it. So it's not people like me as the chief executive, it's not my staff, it's the fundraisers who are part of AFP or associated with AFP, way beyond our membership network, who really make us who we are. That's where the richness of AFP sits.
Well, you talked about the kind of funds being raised, particularly through membership and the contribution from the members. Apart from that, is there any other strategy to raise funds? If so, what are they? How do you go about doing that?
For AFP, it's a challenge. For any association, it's a challenge because we don't have that direct cause, the direct urgency of the cause that you find in grassroots organisations or big NGOs. If you look at an arts-based organisation, you understand that you're being asked to support the programmes it delivers. If you look at an educational institution, the same thing applies. For an association, when you talk about investing in building capacity for the fundraising community around the world, it's quite a hard sell. So we have to work very hard as we go out and we pitch to foundations, we pitch to national governments and say, look, there is a real need for professionalism within the sector. There's a real need for consistent delivery of educational programs. There's a real need for quality control in terms of the teaching that we're offering. Can you help us achieve that? But the answer is, like anything else, if you sell something with conviction and you sell it with heart, then people buy into the idea. And we're finding that the more we go out and the more we speak to people, the more we pitch to people, the more they're prepared to see us as a fundraising organisation, as a capacity building organisation, and less as a membership association. So for us, like all of you, it's a very exciting time to be involved in the non-profit community. There's so much room for change. What we need to be able to do is to channel that change and help work with others to help channel it as well.
Mr. Andrews, how do you plan for fundraising? Do you make an annual plan or a 5-year plan, or what kind of a goal that you have in a particular financial year, and how do you try to achieve that?
I think the critical thing to remember is that fundraising is not an end in itself. Fundraising and resource development is not a charitable or a non-profit objective. What we do is oil the wheels of the organisation that we work for. What we do is help to invest in the organisation to allow it to achieve impact. So where we have to go with this is that we understand that developing a fundraising plan cannot be done in the short term. A fundraising plan has to be part of the strategic plan of any organisation. It has to be built into that. The board of an organisation, the senior management of an organisation have to understand that fundraising is a long-term objective, that it's not enough simply to say we want X 100,000 rupees coming into the organisation in a given year. There's much more, because what you're doing is creating a bond of trust, a bond of support between your organisation, the people it exists to serve, and the people who want to support and engage with it. Fundraising is about much more than raising money. It's about much more than developing resources. It's about creating a fully functioning organisation that will achieve impact in the long term. So to look at it on a year-by-year budgetary cycle is actually self-defeating. You really have to look at it in the medium to long term, 5, 10 years, and match it with the strategy and the strategic objectives of the organisation you serve.
Well, in the process of fundraising, you may be getting various types of reactions from various types of governments. For example, when you work with China, you may have a kind of a response. When you work with developed countries, you may have a different type of a response. When you work with the countries in the Middle East, you may have another type of response. Can you highlight on those kind of reactions from governments and the kind of support that you are able to generate from the various types of governments that we have across the globe?
Yes, I'm fortunate, I suppose, in that I come from a background of public policy development. I learnt my business working within the European Union. And when you bring together that number of countries with such extraordinarily divergent cultural backgrounds and such extraordinarily divergent political objectives, you begin to learn how to navigate those differences. Moving from Europe to North America, where every state in the United States and every province in Canada has a different objective, different sets of regulations, you begin to understand that the critical thing is to identify what it is, the key objectives of the community that you're working in, and then work back from there. You have to be clear about the change and the impact that you're trying to achieve, and that's the thing you have to communicate to government. Not what the fundraising ratio should be, not what the tax regime should be, but the difference that you're trying to make in the communities that they are elected to serve. Politicians frequently disassociate themselves from their political base. They come back to it in times of elections. What we need to remind them is the impact of what we do, the impact of what our community does, and the gap that would be left if we weren't there. Because if the non-profit community wasn't delivering the programs that it does, government would have to step in. And the cost to them, both financially and politically, would be huge if they were seen to miss that opportunity of engagement with the community, with the third sector. And that's a very, very powerful tool for us to remember. So, yes, you have to be flexible. Yes, you have to be sensitive to the differences, but above all else, you have to keep at the front of your mind at every time what it is that you're trying to achieve in terms of impact, and that is the message you have to communicate. Not the functions and tools that you use to get there, but the impact that you want to have.
Earlier in our conversation, you spoke about the importance of ethics. Can you highlight about some of the important aspects as far as AFP is concerned about the ethical standards that one needs to keep in, as well as the legal aspect when we talk about ethics in fundraising?
Absolutely. Every non-profit organization has one huge asset that makes it totally different from a for-profit organization, and that is trust. If you destroy the bond of trust between the community and the organization that seeks to serve it, it takes many, many years to build back. This is not like shareholder value in British Petroleum. This is not like shareholder value for Enron. This is about an intangible thing, but it's a very strong thing, and it's the biggest asset we have. And therefore, understanding what the ethical way to operate in terms of stewarding that relationship is absolutely critical. You have to understand that when somebody trusts you to achieve something on their behalf, when they give you their time and when they give you their money, when they make use of their connections on behalf of your organization and its beneficiaries, they are trusting you to do the best thing that you can with those resources. And therefore, you have to accept that you have to recognize that you have to handle their money well. You need to make best use of the time and the connections that they give to you, and you have to demonstrate to them that taking those resources, you're achieving impact. You have to show that there is no personal gain for you in doing that. You have to show that when you're asking for money, you are not directly benefiting from that process. That's a very different thing from being paid to act as a resource development officer for your organization. Organizations need to be run professionally, and they need permanent staff to help them do that, or many of them do. And where you don't have that, it's every bit as important for a volunteer to act professionally as it is for a paid professional. So keeping that front and foremost, keeping that at the foremost of your mind is the purpose of organisations like AFP. It was the primary reason we were established 50 years ago, was the recognition that there had to be an ethical base for making these approaches to the people who trust us most.
Given the kind of cultural diversity of the humanity spread across all the various continents, how global and united is the kind of a fundraising strategy that we can have, especially when we talk about in terms of ethical standards, maintaining
Yes.
certain ethical standards, how various continents or various cultures or various communities can come out with a kind of ethical standard for each country, or can we follow a kind of a general standard?
It's a really interesting question. What we've found over the years is that while the way in which people approach these issues may differ, the core values do not. People want to achieve impact, they want to see change, they want to give expression to their philanthropic desires. Fundraising and resource development helps them do that. So we initially thought that it would be very difficult to achieve some kind of consistent approach to ethics on an international basis, and indeed that is true. Every country needs to develop an understanding of what the ethical base for fundraising is in that country. But what we achieved in 2006, after 4 years of discussion with 25 fundraising associations from around the world, was the International Statement of Ethical Principles in Fundraising. Now, this is a document that we all agreed encapsulates some of the key principles and key ethical concerns of fundraising associations worldwide. It doesn't try to achieve a unanimous approach, a consistent approach in every aspect. But what it does try to do is articulate the shared ground, the common vision for what fundraising can achieve in a non-profit context. And so that document is available on the websites of many different associations around the world, and it's something that whenever we enter into a conversation with a national government or with another agency, we make sure that we keep front and foremost. It's a critical articulation of our shared beliefs that I think is very important indeed. So, no, one size does not fit all. But in terms of the bottom line, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and how we're trying to achieve it, yes, it is possible to be consistent on a global basis.
Given the kind of experience that you have, particularly with the United States, how do you see the scope of fundraising, or how fundraising is evolving, particularly in Asia Pacific region, as well as the scope that you would see for India?
I think that we have reached one of those thresholds that any profession, any environment reaches from time to time, and I think we've been pushed to it faster because of the economic environment in which we've been sitting for the last 2 or 3 years. I've talked a lot about professionalism, and particularly professionalism in a North American context, but I've also referred to the entrepreneurialism and creativity that you find in the developing fundraising markets of other parts of the world. And I think increasingly, while professionalism will always have a role to play, we're going to be more moving to a direction where the resource development community have to understand that there are many different ways to achieve impact. And it might be that that's a business solution. It might be that it's about social investment. It might well be that it's about traditional philanthropy and fundraising. But the resource development professional is going to have to learn to act much more as a broker, to be able to juggle those various different concepts and recognize when one thing is appropriate where another might not. One of the examples I love to use is Tom's Shoes. Blake Mykowski is the chief executive of Tom's Shoes, and he set the organization up not that long ago. The objective was to retail shoes, but it was also to put shoes on children in Argentina and to provide a manufacturing base in Argentina as well. For every pair of shoes that Tom's Shoes sells, a pair of shoes goes to a child in Argentina. Now that's a very successful business model. Tom's Shoes is going to be publicly quoted fairly soon, and it has made Blake Mykowski a very influential person. But what he has done is achieve the impact that he set out to do. Now the fact that that's a business model, does it really matter? For me, no, because it's about the impact that he achieves. And that kind of entrepreneurial approach is exactly what fundraisers are going to have to move towards, I think. So it's a time of great change and innovation, and I think that makes it a very exciting one for all of us as well. There's never been a better time to engage with the fundraising element of philanthropy than now, because I'm a firm believer that engaging at a time of exponential change gives you so many more opportunities and so much greater a degree of satisfaction than you might do at other times. Now is the time, if you're ever thinking about engaging with fundraising, to do it.
Well, you hail from United Kingdom, which is a welfare state. You are working in the United States, which has a different strategy. And having come to India, given that kind of experience working with the United States as well as United Kingdom, what kind of lessons that India can learn, and when we plan for a fundraising program in India to come out with organization or educational program, what kind of lessons can be learned from these two countries?
I think that the strength of diversity is a lesson that needs to be learned from there. I'm British, but I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Polish, Italian, French. I'm Australian, I'm a New Zealander, I'm South African, I'm American, 57 varieties in fact. And when you look at my children, they have even more varied a background than I do. I think what you learn from countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom is to celebrate diversity. And I think there is no country on the earth that is more diverse than this country here in India. Now, celebrating the strengths of diversity and drawing from those different influences is critical. Making the most of the resources that every facet of the community offers is also critical. When you look at what happens, you don't, in the United Kingdom and the United States, you don't necessarily want to, if you like, almost stigmatize it as being highly professional or very wealthy. What you see is the range of experience, because these are countries where fundraising, where organizations have raised money from the public, raised resources and developed resources from the public for many, many years. And what you see is that there are a huge spectrum of approaches. So from the small grassroots community-based approach to the big institutional approach, these are all things that apply here in India. You have the great educational institutions of this country. You have the great healthcare foundations. You have the IT development. But you also have huge dynamism at the village level and within the communities of this country. Everybody approaches things differently, and in order to really build a successful fundraising profession, you have to bring in those various component pieces. That's what's distinctive about AFP itself as an organisation. As we spoke earlier, AFP encompasses the experience of individuals who've worked in every size, scale and background of non-profit organisation in the United States and the bits of the world that we engage in, and through our sister associations, that wealth of experience becomes even richer. So it's that lesson, I think, more than any else that we need to apply here as well.
Mr. Andrews, you are also concerned about starting some programs of study on fundraising. You must be already having a lot of experience with other countries. Can you highlight about some of the programs that are there, maybe short-term programs, which are there to enable professionals to become really professionals as far as fundraising is concerned?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we feel is most important is consistency of access and consistency of delivery. It's possible to get fundraising training online. It's possible to get fundraising training in many different ways in many different communities throughout this country and many others. But what's lacking is consistent access to those resources, and what's lacking is consistency in the quality with which those resources are delivered. So at the moment, in a developing market, there's a huge need for, if you like, the fundraising toolkit, for people to be able to access information and resources that gives them an outline of what a fundraising division or a fundraising department or even a fundraising campaign looks like. There have to be things that help people understand from the bottom up how you go about approaching this style of resource development. And in order to do that effectively, you have to find a partner who has access to the broad range of communities within an environment. So wherever we operate, that's what we try to do. We try to bring together the community of fundraisers with the, if you like, the educational and program delivery community. And what does AFP bring to that? AFP brings 50 years of experience within fundraising and an understanding and a degree of humility that recognizes that our knowledge of the technique does not mean that we have a knowledge of the environment in which those techniques are going to be used. So we try to create dynamic partnerships that allow us to deliver strong educational programs, initially at the introductory level, the 101 level, but moving forward at the diploma and the certificate level to begin to develop symposia, conferences and workshops that allow people at every level in their profession to get the resources or get close to the resources that they need, but most importantly, I think, to network with other people in a similar position to themselves with similar needs and similar requirements. Now, educational programs are one part of that. They're a critical part of the platform that we need to move to that more dynamic fundraising environment. And so developing the educational platform, I think, is an ideal precursor to creating a true profession within any fundraising environment.
Do you think just by giving a kind of a letter or just speaking to few stakeholders in the educational sector, we can promote the idea of having formal programs of study or courses introduced into various streams on fundraising? One. Number two, if so, at what level do we start? Do we start with educating people on fundraising at the school level or at university level, or just for any kind of functionaries who are already there in the welfare sector?
My daughters are in high school in the United States, and in order to graduate from high school, they have to show that they've done a minimum of 80 hours of social service. They're taught about social responsibility. What they're not taught is about how to, if you like, invest in social responsibility. So what we're finding is that there is a dynamic shift within the United States. People of my generation, I'm in my late 40s, have frequently come into fundraising and resource development from other backgrounds. What we're seeing now is that people in their undergraduate degree are interested in fundraising and resource development as a profession. So I agree with you. I think that we have to hit this much earlier. If you want people to understand what we're doing and the impact that it has, you have to start in the schools. You have to start with simple, practical, focused projects and training within elementary schools, middle schools and high schools. You have to give access to a more developed program at the undergraduate level so that when people leave university at the age of 20 or 21 or finish their undergraduate degree, they're fully aware of what fundraising and resource development can achieve. So we have to start there. I think that you're talking about a long-term exercise. You're talking about trying to create an awareness of the environment which simply doesn't exist at the moment. You can't just snap your fingers and see something change overnight. This is a long-term educational process that we're engaging on, and it will take many, many years to get there. Alexis de Tocqueville was talking about the strength of community in the United States in the middle of the 19th century. So we're talking about an evolution over 150 to 200 years here. I think that we can speed that process up somewhat, but I don't think that we're talking about short-term change. This is about a cultural shift, and cultural shifts do not happen overnight.
Well, in our conversation, we are talking on also the importance of relationship. Now, building up this relationship between partners, between various institutions, is there any kind of a module that is available? What are the kind of major inputs that goes into that kind of a module, if at all we think about building relationship? And does it not need to be in the cultural context, or can we just copy something which is already existing in one part of the world to another country or a part of the globe?
I don't think relationship building is a separate module in itself. It's rather similar to the way in which organizations in the United States in particular talk about internationalization. What you're talking about is something, it's a quality that needs to be, or a quality that needs to be built into any organization at every level. So if you're talking about the learning to build relationships, That's something that is innate in every form of resource development. Everything that you do is about developing a relationship between an individual, a corporation, and the organization that you serve. So every aspect of education in this area has to have a piece of relationship building in it. It's not something that you learn in an isolated sense.
Well, Mr. Andrews, we have talked quite a lot about the importance of fundraising, how important it is for various organizations and individuals to prepare themselves for this. Now, this program that we have developed would be viewed by many of our students, particularly social workers whom we are training across the country as well as from 12 other nations. So, at this juncture, would you like to share any message for our student population who are already involved in learning on social work and trying to become a professional social worker?
Absolutely. Because I think that one of the things that one has to bear in mind is that any organisation needs to be fully integrated. Each person working within that organisation has to understand how they come together in order to achieve the best impact. So for those of you who are training to work on the ground, it's necessary to understand and to work with those people who are trying to get people to support that work. In other words, the resource development team are a critical piece of allowing you to achieve your impact on the ground. They're the people who help you talk with, they're the people who help you put the impact of what you do in front of the broadest possible audience, and they're the ones who help you achieve the long-term sustainability of what you're doing. So I would argue that understanding the process of resource development, being able to apply it yourself, is of the most critical importance. Because in organisations that are truly effective in this sort of work, truly effective in achieving this degree of funding, it is where every single person within that organisation sees themselves as having a role to play in resource development. Not just in delivery, not just in the social welfare, but in the health of the organisation in the round. And so I would strongly urge you to make yourself familiar with the baseline qualifications, the baseline competencies in this area, because you are the ones who can really tell the compelling message that will help people to understand why they have to support you, not why they might support you. You are the ones who see the impact that your organisation has, the communities that it changes, and you are the ones who can really, really talk to that, to the communities who are looking to support you. So without your engagement, your organisation and your resource development team might be able to function very effectively. But if you want to take it up to that next level, you have to engage with them. And that's why I think embedding this program in this way is going to have so much impact.
Well, I must thank Mr. Andrews for being with us today to discuss about Association of Fundraising Professionals in the United States and talking about various aspects of fundraising across the globe and in particular in Asia Pacific region, about the need for organizing agencies and coming out with various strategies for fundraising, speaking about the legal aspects involved in it as well as the ethical aspect of fundraising, along with various strategies for fundraising and resource mobilization. I am sure this program will be of great help to the students of social work, particularly those getting involved with the specialization in community organization and community development. Thank you very much.